On this day in history, August 14th, 1592, the first sighting of the Falkland Islands by John Davis. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, going over the conditions on the islands. The Falkland Islands correspond very nearly in latitude in the southern hemisphere with London in the northern. The temperature is equable, the average of the midsummer months being about 47 degrees Fahrenheit, and that of the two midwinter months, 37 degrees Fahrenheit. The climate is not unlike that of the Outer Hebrides, but is somewhat colder. Occasional heavy snowfalls occur, and the sea in shallow inlets is covered with a thin coating of ice. The sky is almost constantly overcast, and rain falls, mostly in a drizzle, and in frequent showers, on about 250 days in the year. The rainfall is not great, only about 26 inches, but the mean humidity for the year is high. November is considered the only dry month. The prevalent winds from the west, southwest, and south blow continuously, at times approaching the force of a hurricane. A region more exposed to storms both in summer and winter it would be difficult to mention. Fitzroy, Voyages of Adventure and Beagle, page 228. The fragments of many wrecks emphasize the dangers of navigation, which are increased by the absence of beacons, the only lighthouse being the one maintained by the Board of Trade on Cape Pembroke, near the principal settlement. Of aboriginal human inhabitants there is no trace in the Falklands, and the land fauna is very scanty. A small wolf or dog, the loup renard of de Boinville, is extinct, the last being seen about 1875 on the West Falkland. Some herds of cattle and horses ran wild until recently, but these were, of course, introduced, the first having been brought by de Bougainville. Horses and cattle have declined in numbers, being profitably replaced by sheep, of which there are over 600,000 in 1926. Except for about 80 acres, all land is used for sheep farming, which started in East Falkland in 1835. Land birds are few in kind. However, the snipe and military starling, which, on account of its scarlet breast, is locally known as the robin. Seabirds are abundant, and, probably from the islands having been comparatively lately peopled, they are singularly tame. Gulls and amphibious birds abound in large variety. 3 kinds of penguin have their rookeries and breed here, migrating yearly for some months to the South American mainland. Stray specimens of the great king penguin have been observed, and there are also mollymawks, a kind of albatross, black-crested grebe, Cape pigeons, and many carrion birds. Kelp and upland geese abound, the latter being edible, and their shooting affords some sport. The Falkland Islands form essentially a part of Patagonia, with which they are connected by an elevated submarine plateau, and their flora is much the same as that of Antarctic South America. The trees, which form dense forest and scrub in southern Patagonia and in Fuegia, are absent, owing to the strong gales and salt spray, and attempts at planting trees have not been met with great success. The greater part of the camp, the open country, is formed of peat, which in some places is of great age and depth, and at the bottom of the bed very dense and bituminous. The peat is different in character from that of northern Europe. The lower plants enter but little into its composition, and it is formed almost entirely of the roots and stems of Empetrum ruberum, a variety of the common crowberry of the Scottish hills with red berries, called by the Falklanders the diddle-dee-berry. Of Mitrus numeralia, a little creeping myrtle whose leaves are used by the shepherds as a substitute for tea, and of sedges and sedge-like plants, such as Astelia pumila, Gaymardi australis, and Boscavia grandiflora. Peat is largely used as fuel, coal being only obtained at a high price. 2 vegetable products, the balsam bog, Azorella caspitosa, and the tussock grass, Poa flabellata, have been objects of curiosity and interest ever since the first accounts of the islands were given. The first is a huge mass of a bright green color, living to a great age, and when dead becoming of a gray and stony appearance. When cut open, it displays an infinity of tiny leaf buds and stems, and at intervals there exudes from it an aromatic resin. The tussock grass is a wonderful and most valuable natural production, which, owing to the introduction of stock, has become extinct in the 2 main islands. but still flourishes elsewhere in the group. It is a reed-like grass which grows in dense tufts from 6 to 10 feet high from stool-like root crowns. It forms excellent fodder for cattle and is regularly gathered for that purpose. The population was estimated at 2,427 in 1933. The large majority of the inhabitants live in the East Island, and the predominating element is Scottish. Scottish Shepherds having superseded the South American Guachos. In 1867, there was no settlers on the West Island, and the government issued a proclamation offering leases of grazing stations on very moderate terms. In 1868, all the available land was occupied. These lands are fairly healthy, the principal drawback being the virulent form assumed by simple epidemic maladies. The occupation of the inhabitants is almost entirely pastoral, and the principal industry is sheep farming. Wool farms, by far the largest export, and tallow, hides, bones, and frozen mutton are also exported. Trade is carried on almost entirely with the United Kingdom. The value of exports in 1926 was nearly £240,000, most of which was in wool, and of its imports nearly £180,000. The Falkland Islands Company, having its headquarters at Stanley, and an important station in the camp at Darwin, carries on an extensive business in sheep farming and the dependent industries, and, in general, import trade. The development of this undertaking necessitated the establishment of stores and workshops at Stanley, and ships can be repaired and provided in every way, a matter of importance in such stormy seas. A former trade in oil and sealskin has decayed, owing to the smaller number of whales and seals remaining about the islands, and the headquarters of the whaling industry has been moved to South Georgia. Communications are maintained on horseback and by water, and there are no roads except at Stanley. Mail leaves for England monthly, passage being about 4 weeks. The Falkland Islands were first seen by Davis in the year 1592, and Sir Richard Hawkins sailed along the north shore in 1594. The claims of Amerigo Vespucci to a previous discovery are doubtful. In 1598, Sebald de Wert, a Dutchman, visited them, and called them the Sebald Islands, a name which they bear on some Dutch maps. Captain Strong sailed through between the two principal islands in 1690, landed upon one of them, and called the passage Falkland Sound, and from this the group afterwards took its English name. In 1764, the French explorer de Bougainville took possession of the islands on behalf of his country, and established a colony at Port Louis on Berkeley Sound. But in 1767, France ceded the islands to Spain, de Bougainville being employed as intermediary. Meanwhile, in 1765, Commodore Byron had taken possession on the part of England on the ground of prior discovery, and had formed a small settlement at Port Egmont on the small island of Saunders. The Spanish and English settlers remained in ignorance, real or assumed, of each other's presence until 1769 to 1770, when Byron's action was nearly the cause of war between England and Spain, both countries having armed fleets to contest the barren sovereignty. In 1771, however, Spain yielded the islands to Great Britain by convention. The Falkland Islands are a crown colony, with a governor and executive and legislative councils. The colony is self-supporting, the revenue being largely derived from drink duties, and there is no public debt. The Falklands are the seat of a colonial bishop. Education is compulsory. The government maintains schools and traveling teachers. The Falkland Islands Company also maintains a school at Darwin. Stanley was for some years a naval station, but ceased to be so in 1904. It is now a wireless station.